And now I'll have the pleasure of introducing your presenters for today's part one of the webinar. John Almarode is an associate professor and executive director of teaching and learning in the College of Education at James Madison University. He works with pre-service teachers and actively pursues his research interests. He and his colleagues have presented their work to the United States Congress, the U.S. Department of Education, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. John has authored multiple reports, articles, and books, including Clarity for Learning, the Success Criteria Playbook, How Tutoring Works, and How Learning Works. And Kateri Thunder has served as an inclusive early childhood educator, an upward bound educator, a mathematics specialist, and an assistant professor of math education at James Madison University, as well as being the site director for the Central Virginia Writing Project. Kateri is an author on the Visible Learning for Mathematics series, the recently published Visible Learning in Early Childhood, a member of NCTM's research committee, and co-author of The Math Diet. Currently, Kateri works as an educational consultant with educators around the globe. So now let's get started with John and Kateri. And John, this amazing group of attendees is all yours.
Right. Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're chiming in from across the globe. We're so glad you're here. Kateri, do you want to say hello to the group?
Hey guys, it's wonderful to see you. Rain, shine, and snow. We've got it all.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. You know, Kateri, when we were asked to put together this webinar, it took me back to my early days in the classroom. I taught physics and mathematics and chemistry and different variations of those disciplines. And I remember struggling with learners figuring out what it was that I wanted them to learn, why it was important that they learned it, and then having them take ownership of that learning and aiming towards that target. Because we walk in making the assumption that if I like Newton's laws of motion, if I like solving systems of equations, and I see its value, even if I don't see its value because of utility purposes, but because knowing it for the sake of knowing it, I took for granted that they saw mathematics and science the way I did. And now your experience takes you all over the K-12 spectrum, correct?
Yeah, and I feel the same way. All those conversations with kids about what are you learning, what are you working on, all of my conferences, all of my feedback, my questioning got so much more efficient and effective when we started talking about teacher clarity and success criteria.
And that's really where we're going to zero in today. In fact, I'm going to offer a deal hopefully you can't refuse. How many of you on this Zoom call, and you can do a show of hands with your emotional reaction, you can give a thumbs up, you can say me in the chat box, however you want to do it, but how many of you on this call, on this Zoom meeting, would be interested in picking up some ideas that had the potential to double the rate of learning in your classroom? If that's you, if you could raise your electronic hand, type it into the chat box. How many of you would like to pick up some ideas that would potentially double the rate of learning in your classroom? Then you've come to the right spot and you've logged on to the right Zoom account, if that's the case. And I love it. Oh, pick me. Yes, absolutely. Only double. So yeah, it may be one of those weeks already where double is not enough at this point. The cool part is we're going to offer some other ways to add to that double. So what we're going to zero in is the role of teacher clarity. And here's the hint, teacher clarity is that thing. So if you're taking notes, if you've got the back of your sleeve available, the tablecloth at which you're setting, if you would just make sure you write down the word clarity. Clarity is going to be our buzzword for the day. It's also going to be the buzzword for next week. We're going to start laying the foundation for teacher clarity and in particular success criteria. And then next week, our colleagues, our favorite colleagues, are going to take the baton and take it across the finish line during their time together. But clarity is going to be our focus and how to move that learning forward. What Kateri and I hope to share with you are the following ideas in the form of success criteria. When we're done this afternoon, this morning, this evening, whatever time of day it is for you, we hope that you can begin to say with confidence these following statements. Hopefully you can explain the role of learning intentions and success criteria in ensuring clarity. We're going to zero in on those practices, but we're not going to park there now. We're headed that direction though before we move on. We're going to look at different ways of creating and sharing success criteria. And of course, it all feeds into clarity. What about the relationship between the types of learning and the different ways of sharing success? One of the things we want to zero in on is, look, it's all about alignment. What we want them to learn, the type of learning we expect, must then be a consistent message in the choices we make in the classroom. And so we're going to unpack that. We were probably not going to get that today, but that will be the follow-up. So you'll want to make sure to come back for part 2. And finally, how do we leverage this for equity? How do we use this to ensure that all students have the equity of access and opportunity to the highest level of learning possible? What we hope to share with you over the next 2 webinars is that clarity is actually the launching point for equity. That without clarity, we do not achieve the diversity, the equity, and the inclusion in our schools and classrooms that is the vision for what happens in education. And so at the end of next week's webinar, part 2, we will really lock that in and talk about how clarity is the foundation, the launching point, the starting point for equity. Those 4 I can statements are our target. They represent the target that we're aiming for over the next 2 webinars. Very quickly, I want you to just have a look at those, maybe on some scrap paper, on your tablecloth, your neighbor's sleeve, whatever you've got available to you if you're taking notes. Just jot down some questions you have. Just quickly jot down a few questions you have based on these success criteria. What questions pop into your mind? What does this make you think about? What are some ideas that are popping up in your brain? Just take a couple of minutes and jot those down. We'll come back to these in just a moment. Ooh, Alexandra, that's an amazing question.
My favorite question, John.
Yeah, I know. Do you want to jump on that?
Oh, we are going to make sure that we address that for sure, because that's my jam right there. Kids that are not reading yet. How do we connect with them with success criteria?
She won't say this out loud because she's too modest, but Kateri was and still is, if she were to go back into the pre-K classroom, one of the strongest pre-K teachers I have ever witnessed in a classroom environment. And she used this work every day to move her students' learning forward. And so she'll get into that for sure. How can teachers know that they have created effective learning intentions and success criteria? We're going to actually introduce a litmus test very soon. A litmus test that gives you information and feedback on how it's going, as well as them some feedback on how it's going. Differentiation. So that's another one of Kateri's specialty. Kateri, do you want to comment on that quickly?
It goes exactly to that last point, right? Equity. We want to reach all of our learners. So how does success criteria maintain those high expectations for every learner? We're all going to reach those success criteria, but we're going to scaffold in different ways to make sure our learners get there.
Absolutely. So all of those we're going to address. Sister Shannon Dillon, we're going to talk about that as well. And if we don't get to it this time, it will be in the follow-up because it does address that 4th success criteria. Hey, let's get started. Hey, Kateri, I want to, I'm sorry, Sharon, and thank you for that feedback. Kateri, I want to show a non-example. So what we're going to do is show a non-example. And as you move into this, I want you to kind of live chat. So as you watch this video, it's a non-example. I want you to live chat. What do you notice is happening in this video clip as a non-example? Here we go. Take a look. So a lot of you had different responses to this video. Although the treatment is harsh, it is slapstick humor. So certainly that part is not what we were looking at. What we were looking at, though, is the interaction between the teacher and the student. Now, they're both adults, and so this is a stretch, but it still works. The difference or the interaction between the teacher and the student, that's what we're going to zero in on our time together. Clarity about learning is all about the interaction between the teacher and the student and what that looks like and how that unfolds. Now, remember, just out of curiosity, in the chat box, Kateri and I told you that you were joining us and that we were going to offer you the opportunity to pick up some ideas that had the potential to do what? Who remembers what you agreed to? We were going to share some ideas that had the potential to do what? See if we can. Yes, double learning. Tammy, you got it. So Tammy, you get a free book. And that's exactly what this is all about. Teacher Clarity has an effect size. In other words, effect size is a way of conceptualizing or quantifying growth. It has the chance to double the rate of learning. Now, why would we say double? And why does the graphic not fit the actual number? A couple things I want to point out. Notice that this is actually 0.75. 0.75 is where this image seems to place the arrow. Now, why is it? Well, 0.75 is the old clarity figure. So if you've read anything about teacher clarity, if you've been around teacher clarity, you'll know that 0.75 is what the number has been in the past. But what has happened is that it has grown because we've gotten better at implementing teacher clarity. Why do we say double the rate of learning? Well, because on average, the average growth rate for a student for 1 year's worth of schooling is 0.4. So 0.84 is double that rate. Now, keep in mind, the hinge point for teacher clarity, 0.75, was the old number. The new updated numbers with the new meta-analyses and the new database, we just updated the database. And guess what? The effect size is 0.84. We're getting better at this. The numbers are going up. And why are they going up? They're going up because of the implementation of teacher clarity. What's my point? Effect sizes represent potentials, not guarantees. So when you read research, when you talk to a researcher and they tell you, oh, the effect size for this is what? What they're telling you is it has the potential to demonstrate this much growth, not a guarantee. If you would, in the chat box, type in the word potential. Type in the word potential. Teacher clarity has the potential to double the rate of learning. Our job this afternoon, this evening, this morning, wherever you are in the globe, Kateri and I want to move beyond potential and talk about implementation. How do we make sure that that 0.84 is not a pipe dream? How do we make sure that 0.84 is not a pie in the sky aspiration, but instead, what about teacher clarity and student clarity and clarity overall can we pull from this so that we implement it in a way that moves that from potential to impact? That's our goal. That's our goal over the next 2 sessions. What can we do to implement clarity in such a way that it moves from potential to impact? So let's get started. What do you think we mean by clarity? I'm going to pause for a minute and let you process this. Don't put anything in the chat yet. I want you to, on some scrap paper, maybe some notes, if you've got a note sheet in front of you, if you've got some, I want you to answer this question. Before we share with you the official definition, we'd like to know what you think clarity is. So on your notes, don't put it in the chat, do it in your notes. What do you think is meant by clarity? What does clarity mean in your mind? You have 2 minutes to develop your answer, 2 minutes, and then we're going to do something with it. What is meant by clarity? Excellent. So we've got some folks putting things in the chat box. Now's the time to put it in there. This is what clarity is all about. And by the way, you can scroll up and look at some of these responses. but we want to take all of these answers because all of them are correct. But we want to take all of these answers and put them together into a conceptual framework for what is clarity and what does it mean. We've got to, before we talk about implementation, we have to look at the aspects of this implementation. The way Kateri and I like to think about it, and the way you'll hear Doug and Olivia reference this, is there are 4 entry points or doorways to clarity that we have to walk through. If we ever want to get from potential to implementation, we have to walk through 4 distinct doorways or 4 distinct entry points for clarity. The first one is organization. Clarity has to do with how we organize our instruction. How do we sequence it? How do we set up our classrooms? How do we organize the learning experience? Something as basic as how do we start it out to how we finish it, how we group our students, whether they're doing individual work or cooperative or collaborative learning, and then in what order or sequence does this happen? Clarity is about organization. How do we organize instruction so that learners are with us in that experience? I'm not saying it's easy, but at the very least, it's organized in a clear way. The second entry point for clarity has to do with our explanations. How is it that we explain the concepts? How is it that we present the information? How is it that we present the knowledge, the skills, and the understandings to our learners? Are those explanations clear, or do they introduce a new variable that confuses learners? Do our explanations muddy the waters or provide clarity? Again, we're not saying they have to be easy. What we're saying is that we have to have clarity in the explanations. By the way, let's do another show of hands. How many of you, when you're getting ready to teach, Kateri, I love this one because I do this in the shower, in the car, walking down the street in the morning for my morning walk. How many of you, when you know you're about to introduce a very difficult concept, a tough skill, or a very difficult understanding, do you rehearse how you're going to explain it to 12-year-olds, to 16-year-olds?
Yeah, or to your husband,
or
which is what I do. And then I get blank faces constantly. And then we argue about how many averages there are in mathematics.
There you go. And I see somebody put in here, mirror or colleagues, right? What you're doing is you're trying to fine tune your clarity of explanations. Here's the third entry point for clarity. And Christopher, the PB&J experiment is one of the funniest things ever. And that's exactly the way to try that out. We can also do it with tying our shoes. Have learners write down the steps for tying the shoe and then have another learner try to follow it. PB&J is another great example. My cousin, who is a 3rd grade teacher in Virginia, uses the PB&J example all the time. Speaking of examples, Kateri is going to walk us through some of this later on, but we also have to pick our examples very clearly. For example, if I'm teaching English language arts and I'm introducing the concept of symbolism, I want to make sure that my examples provide clear parameters around that concept and aren't fuzzy so that they could go one way or the other. In other words, we want to reduce ambiguity in our examples so that learners focus on what they need to know and don't get distracted by what is neat to know. Last and certainly not least, are we assessing what we claim that we are teaching? This is one of the most challenging ideas. I struggled with this as a classroom teacher. I wanted my learners to engage in higher order thinking, deep thinking, processes, focused on being mathematicians, being physicists, being chemists. And then I'd turn right around and give them a multiple choice assessment. Now, there's nothing wrong with a multiple choice assessment, just like there's nothing wrong with promoting deep thinking, but we can't say one thing and do another. That's a clarity problem. In other words, how do we make sure that our assessments align with what we say we're going to teach in our examples, what we present to learners through our explanations, and represent how we organized instruction? These are the 4 entry points into clarity. These are 4 doorways we have to walk through if we're ever going to get to clarity, if we're ever going to experience that 0.84, and if we're ever going to move from potential to implementation. So let's do something with this. I keep asking you to find some notes. I'm actually going to pull down a sheet of paper here, and I want to show you something because this is going to be something you get to do in just a moment. If you can grab a sheet of paper, I yanked one out of the printer here. I'm actually going to fold it first like a hamburger, or a tofu burger. We want to be inclusive. And then fold it like a hot dog or a tofu dog. So you're going to have
Very
something.
proud of you, John, for learning those words.
Thank you. I try to be inclusive. And so I've got this grid, and you see it on the screen. Now, if you don't want to fold a sheet of paper, if you would just draw a grid somewhere in your notes, I'm going to do that as well, in case there are those of you that would prefer to just draw this out rather than fold a sheet of paper. And so you should have something that looks like this. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a moment to reflect on this. What are you going to reflect on? Well, the 4 doorways into clarity. What I'd like you to do on your note sheet, what do you do in your classroom to assure that there's clarity of organization? What practices, what processes, what strategies, what interventions do you use on a regular basis that support organization? How do you check your explanations to make sure they're clear? Someone in the chat box early on, Kateri, said, how do we verify that this is working? Well, how do you verify that your explanations are solid? That would be what you would put in the explanations quadrilateral. How do you cross-check and check your examples to make sure your examples are clear? And finally, last and certainly not least, what practices, processes, and strategies do you engage in to assure your assessments have clarity? So I'd like you to fill this out. What do you do? How do you do this? And where is your work around these 4 ideas with clarity? Please fill it out on your sheet of paper or your notes. We'll take 3 minutes to do this. So take 3 minutes and work on your own. And then we're going to add the next layer to this webinar. Take about 3 minutes. Kateri and I will keep a watch on the time. About another 2 minutes. What do you do to make sure organization is clear? How do you make sure your explanations are clear? What about your examples? What about your assessments? 2 minutes. 2 minutes to finish the chart, or at least put a dent in the chart. 2 minutes. About another minute, another minute. Take the last few seconds to finish up your comments or your ideas. And Billy, we're going to address that this afternoon, this evening, or this morning, depending on where you are on the globe. We're going to address that very thing. We're just laying the foundation with what the doorways are. We're going to talk about implementing those doorways next. So Kateri, let's unpack this a little bit with some quick examples. One of the things that I think of when I think of organization is I set my room up, I set the learning experience up to go from simple to complex, concrete to abstract. And I make sure that the organization reflects each stop along the way. Do you have any ideas that you would add to this chart around any of these four?
Yeah, a lot of the comments about ask your learners, right? So the thing that I really focus on is interactions. How am I interacting with students to build on the examples they're thinking about and the examples I have, connecting those? How am I interacting to hear their explanations and use their language in my explanations? So interactions, that's a big thing that I use to guide my work.
Which is a great transition, because if you remember when we started off, we talked about clarity, the big idea. We often talk about teacher clarity, teacher clarity, teacher clarity, but it's not just teacher clarity, it's clarity around learning. And that involves both sides of this. And so to get right to the heart of the matter, one of the big ideas that we want to share is that clarity in learning, the big idea of clarity, is the interaction between the teacher and the student, just as Kateri just articulated. It's teacher clarity and student clarity, and that interaction determines whether or not we're going to get to that 0.84. So let's unpack this a bit more. I mentioned that we would introduce a litmus test to you. In other words, how do you know if this is happening? How do you know if I have clarity of organization, explanations, examples, and assessments? What's the litmus test? Well, if clarity is the interaction between teacher clarity and student clarity, let's start with teacher clarity. Well, what would be a good litmus test to see if learners really did have clarity? Well, it comes down to three key questions that I have to answer as a teacher, that Kateri has to answer as a teacher, that Billy has to answer as a teacher, that Lisa has to answer as a teacher. These three questions serve as the litmus test for clarity. Do I know what it is that I want my students to learn? What is it that I want my students to learn? The next question is, why do I want them to learn it? Do I have clarity around the relevance and the authenticity of this particular learning? What do I want my students to learn? Why do I want them to learn it? And then you can probably guess what the last question is. How will I know that they've learned it? Because knowing the what, why, and how helps me decide how I'm going to organize the day. The what and the how I'll know I learn it helps me decide what examples to use. The why and the what work together with the explanations. And that third question, how will I know when they have learned it? That's all about the assessments. If I can't answer that question, then I can't develop effective assessments of that learning. These three questions are the litmus test for us as teachers and the launching point for clarity. Make sure you have those three questions down, or if you've got a smartphone, you might take a picture of it or a screenshot. But we want to grab those questions because we're about to flip to the other side of the coin here. Remember, clarity is the interaction between teacher clarity and student clarity. So let's go look at what the students must be able to articulate. In other words, I must share what I've unpacked as clarity with my learners so that they can answer those three questions. What am I learning as a student? Do our students each and every day know what it is they're learning? Not what they're doing, what they're learning. Now, someone said that earlier in the chat box. They said, clarity is all about the learning, not the doing. That's exactly right. What am I learning today? Well, page 65, questions 1 through 19. Nope. That's what you're doing. What you're learning is the relationship between inverse operations and solving equations, or equivalence in expressions. It's broader than the do. Why is it important for the student to learn this? Now, we run into some challenges with this one because a lot of what we teach, the why behind it is not intuitive. And so there are two ways to think about the why. Two ways. In the chat box, put in the number 2. There are two ways to think about this. The first way is authentic. In other words, I'm learning about this because it's going to be of some benefit to me in an authentic context. but that's often hard. And for those of you that teach mathematics, trig identities, what in the world? I'm a math person. Trig identities. It really doesn't have any relevance in life because now everything's computer animated, computer automated. And so I don't have to know trig identities. The same thing goes with reading very specific novels. While The Great Gatsby is a very popular novel in the United States, there are other novels we can choose there. And so why am I learning it? So that I can understand The Great Gatsby. That's probably not, that's probably not a good answer. There are other things we can read. I'm not hating on Gatsby. I'm just saying. So one is authentic. The second way has to do with utility. What does that mean? It means I need to learn this because I'm going to use it in just a second. Today, we're learning about conversions in the metric system so that I can measure things in different units. That's a why. Because the task I'm about to do is going to require me to measure things in different units. I'm not trying to convince the fifth grader that they need this in life. I'm just simply saying you need it because you're going to use it in about 10 minutes. You need it because you're about to do it. And we're learning about light and perspective in art so that I can construct a still life. I need it right now. I'm not saying you're going to be the next Vincent van Gogh. I'm just saying you're going to need it right now. I'm learning about overhand throwing. I'm learning about overhand throwing. Why? So that I can hit a dynamic target. I'm not saying you're going to be the next Cy Young winner in Major League Baseball. I'm just saying you need to learn about overhand throwing because you're going to use it in just a second. And Sarah has summed it up. Number one is authenticity and relevancy beyond. The second one is utility and relevance right now, what they're going to use it for in class. And then that brings us to our third part of student clarity, this idea that they have to know then what success looks like. So these three questions, and Amber, thank you for putting that in there. These three questions are the litmus test for students. Notice how they are very, very similar. Teacher clarity, we have to do the groundwork first, and then we have to communicate it in a way that allows students to jump on board. The answer to these three questions power the learning experience. They drive the learning experience. That's how it works. And they drive the learning experience because they inform how we're going to organize it, what our explanations are going to look like and sound like, what examples we're going to pick, and what assessments we're going to use to check in on learning. So let's do a quick task. On your own, I want you to think about these three questions. If Kateri and I were to show up in your school, and some of you live in geographic locations where we would love to come and show up in your schools. Alaska, we're going to wait until a different season comes on board and then we'll talk. But that was a joke. We love Alaska. But what happens if we were to show up in your class and arbitrarily select students and ask them these three questions? What kind of responses would we get? Which questions would they find easy to answer? Which questions would they struggle with? How would your students respond to these three questions? Take just a couple of minutes. You can put it in the chat box or write it down on your own. Take about 1.5 minutes to think through that. These are great responses. These are outstanding responses. And Kateri, this gets me so excited because our job is to make sure those responses go away. We want to make sure that after this 2-part webinar, the responses you're reporting right now disappear. That's our goal. And that happens when we communicate and share clarity in an intentional, deliberate, and purposeful way. Because it's not a bad answer to say because the teacher said so, because it's for a grade, when he says I'm done, when she says I'm done, because it's on the syllabus. Those answers are genuine answers. They're authentic answers. But what they tell us is we're not going to get that. In other words, there's a gap between the potential and the implementation. And so our job, starting here in about 30 seconds, is to shift from getting answers like the ones you put in your chat box to getting the answers we're looking for, the real what, why, and how. And it comes from communicating and sharing. So we're going to shift to the implementation piece. And we're going to start with some very specific examples. I want to show you some examples. This is from a school system in Georgia. This is a school system in Georgia. They decided that the implementation, rather than get hung up on fancy implementation, why not just use the 3 questions and help students answer those 3 questions by engaging the teacher in answering those 3 questions and putting it together. So walking into this biology classroom and this environmental science classroom, here we go. This teacher chose to explicitly take the 3 questions of student clarity and present them on a daily basis and make that the focal point. So what am I learning? We're learning why cells are small. Why is that important? Because they're the basic unit of life. Great. How will I know I've learned it? And then there's the statement of evidence. How about organisms interacting with each other in nature? Here's another example. In chemistry, predicting products. What are we learning? Predicting products. Done. It's right there. Why are we learning this? Oh, because we're trying to figure out why some substances react and others do not. How will they know they've mastered it or learned it or are proficient at whatever language you want to use? There are the statements of success. Now, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. What's the first observation you make about this specific example? So here's the amazing thing. Every student in the classroom, this classroom, every single student in this classroom could tell us what, why, and how without hesitation. So what's my point? Yeah, it's cute. Yeah, it's very Pinteresty, right? So it's useful because it's useful now. So, and to go back to Sarah's explanation, it's not trying to convince them of why it's useful 20 years from now. They need to know this because in just a few moments, they're going to have to find the area. In other words, it's a utility why. It's a utility why, and multiplication and division, repeated multiplication. By the way, the area model is one of the approaches to teaching multiplication. And so this teacher's actually tying the area model together with repeated addition. Which is an interesting way to tie together the math. It's rather progressive in its thinking about math. And so this is one of the ways to go after this. What's my point? The teacher had a system for engaging learners in this. If you look at the success criteria, I'm going to pull out my pen again. This was also in their interactive notebooks. So they had it right there with them. So it didn't need to take up a lot of board space because they had it glued into their interactive notebooks. And so as they worked through it, not only could they check off that they'd met the success criteria, but they would actually put the page number in their interactive notebook, telling the teacher where to go look to find evidence that they had done it. So we've got to make sure that we don't get hung up on aesthetics, but we stay focused on those questions. Isn't that cool? Yeah, absolutely. And finally, here's another example. Now we're going to get to see some other examples in language arts, in social studies. These are some science examples. We're going to get some math examples, but some language arts examples are coming so that it's balanced out.
John, you're the example of the students putting it into their interactive notebooks so they could refer to it reminds me of a question that I hear a lot. Do they have to be posted? Do we have to put up learning intentions and these 3 questions and have it up there? And, you know, I've been teaching 4-year-olds for 7 years, and I rarely had it up for them because they weren't reading yet, but I found other ways to make sure it was visible to them. So thinking about having the posting be available to you as the teacher so that you can keep coming back to that and remember, what were we learning today? Right, that's what I need to focus my clarity on. And then to have it available for learners to be able to refer back to and help each other and themselves, it helps to really empower that independence so that they can look back and say, oh, right, this is what we're working on today, or here's how I'll know I'm successful. So the posting isn't just to check it off a list, like, yep, I got it posted, but to really support both the teacher and the student.
Absolutely. And we're going to see lots more examples of that. Jessica, one of your questions was, can you have 2 sets, one for content, one for language? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. You can even have one for social emotional learning. For example, today I'm learning, let's use the example on the screen. And so what am I learning? I'm learning how temperature, agitation, and surface area affect the solubility rate. I can have another learning intention that's about social emotional. I am learning how to engage in critical dialogue and provide feedback to my peers. There's a social emotional part there. Okay. So that's the catch. We can use social emotion. We can even do language. I am learning about precise scientific language when doing experiments. There's a language learning intention. Excellent. And many of you have pointed out, Billy and Megan, we're getting to the implementation part. Right now, we're just talking about how we make sense of this. Now we've got to figure out how to make this jump off the page. And so let's start talking about communicating and sharing of clarity with these very specific outcomes, right? How do we get to this? I want to show you a video clip about 2 major practices that actually support clarity. So if we're talking about deliberate, intentional, purposeful practices, we've got a large set of those, right? So for example, unpacking the standards is one of those things. Learning progressions is another practice. Developing that progression, developing learning intentions, developing success criteria, developing informative assessments, not summative, not formative. Separating and sorting the 2 of those out is a waste of time. Michael Scriven, when he developed the concept of formative and summative assessments, never meant for it to be this huge debate. So let's just change them and call them informative assessments. Assessments that inform where our learners are in their learning and informs them of where they are in their learning. Then it involves task design. I have to make sure that my task is clear and that it aligns with the previous practices. Scaffolding. How do I then differentiate? These are all very specific practices. Evaluating the evidence of learning. So those informative assessments give me evidence. I have to look at it and see, well, how did this go? And last and certainly not least, where to next? The practices we want to zero in on during our time together, Kateri and I really want to zero in on learning intentions and success criteria. And then Doug and Olivia will take it a step further and start to talk about thinking and equity. And one of our goals, and don't panic, Billy and Megan, we're actually going to talk about how to move beyond just posting them. We don't want these to be speed limit signs. And for those of you that have gotten a ticket, you know what I'm talking about. Learning intentions and success criteria can quickly become speed limit signs, right? We know they're there. They're always there, but nobody pays attention to them until you see blue lights. Likewise, learning intentions and success criteria can be a lot like those speed limit signs in that we only pay attention to them when the teacher or with the administrator or the coach or the supervisor walks by, and then all of a sudden we pay attention to them. So we want to zero in on these, specifically learning intentions and success criteria as practices that propel this forward. Let's take a look at what this looks like and what teachers have to say about learning intentions and success criteria, and then we're going to dive deep. Here we go.
When I think about my learning intentions, the first thing I do is think of my unit goals, and those are definitely based on my standards. So I consider what standard I need to cover in a certain period of time.
First thing I'm going to do is really look at what content do I want in a unit, and then once I've decided what I have in that unit, then I can start breaking it down day by day. And once I have, like, okay, on Monday I'm going to teach this, then I start developing my learning intentions, saying, okay, what do I really want the students to accomplish by the end of the day? And so first I'm thinking, what are they going to learn? How are they going to learn it? And then who are they going to learn it with? So that's that social intention in there. Can I get a collaborative aspect to go along with the learning intentions for that day?
I develop my daily learning intentions from my learning progressions in the unit. So the way that I establish those is by backwards planning, using that teacher clarity model of starting with the standards, bundling them in a way that makes sense, coming up with a summative assessment at the end, and visualizing what are the steps that my students need to take to get there, and then planning my daily lessons from there.
So I consider the success criteria as our step-by-step increment to accomplishing our learning goals for each day or week or unit. And the success criteria for me is how do I get from point A to Z? So again, if I'm thinking about how can I best help students to write an introductory paragraph, I know that our first step is to consider our thesis statement. So that's my goal, that's my focus of that writing.
They can be through a multiple of activities. It could be peer evaluations on talking with each other, in-class activity, whether that be individual, partner, or a group. Trying to give them some kind of formal of assessment.
Something just very straightforward so they know, okay, this is what we're covering today. This is the topic, i.e. the learning intentions, and this is the goal. And then these are the things I need to be able to do by the end of the lesson to prove that I've met that goal and know what I know I learned.
I really like that question because when I first came to this school, I had that same question. So I feel like it's taken me, I've gone through that journey over the past 3 years. So I think the learning intentions are really an overarching view of what they're learning that day. It also might relate to the whole unit, whereas I feel like the success criteria are really specific actions that the students are doing to show that they're successful. So I teach math, so in math, like I can solve for X, whereas the learning intention is more broad, like I'm learning how to solve one-step equations.
Some instructional things is every day I start off my day, we have this routine where we go through the learning intentions and success criteria, not only on my whiteboard, but I also present them in the slides. And as we're going through the day, I will reference back to them and how they connect to the activity we're doing. And so that students are able to understand when should I be able to mark off the success criteria that I have gotten there.
For me, because like I said, I use a lot of writing and maybe more involved rubrics at the end of a unit, we might situate those learning intentions in that rubric. This is the part of the rubric that we're working on right now. And I say that because when we do activities in an English class, I always like to have them have the rubric right next to them for a couple of reasons. It's so they have that visual of this is what I'm working towards. It also is a nice reorienting place for them if they're kind of feeling like, what are we doing right now? How does it relate to the end goals? And also, hopefully it situates their understanding of where they're at in the learning process. so that they can see, well, what have I done so far to get to this point? Where do I still need to go in relation to that final assessment?
And so it's not just something that sits up on the board and then we cover it really quick and I say, this is what we're doing for the day, and then, you know, we don't really revisit it anymore. I take a lot of time at the beginning of each of my classes to really go through and figure out, what are these learning intentions? What are you supposed to be grasping today? What is your overall goal to be able to assess your learning? So we go over things like vocabulary that's in the learning intentions.
During our distance learning, I learned how to use digital notebooks, and I found that as such a wonderful tool for helping students engage with our success criteria and learning intentions each day. Our first page of our digital notebook has our success criteria, our learning intentions broken apart, and we engage with it regularly through different links or moments where we even might cross things out or check that we have successfully met each goal. So what's really nice is this is our go-to place for everything, every class, every day. And so we're building these habits to look at the success criteria multiple times through the day to make sure that we're progressing toward our learning goals.
It gives them like a road or a guideline on every day. It tells them what they're going to be learning, how they're going to be learning, and then obviously the last piece is how they know they learned it. A great example would be at the end of every period, or like frequently, I give exit tickets. So the exit ticket is based off of these success criteria for the day. So recently we did the Industrial Revolution, and one of the exit ticket was to be able to tell me at least 5 effects of the Industrial Revolution, whether they were positive or negative. If my students can do that, that 1 tells them that they've learned what I needed them to learn for the day, and then 2, it also gives me good data and feedback, and so I can progress through the lesson.
I think it starts with me. So I think that learning intentions and success criteria have really made me a better teacher because I'm just so much more transparent with my students. So it helps me become transparent with them, and then it just really gives them a guide for what they're learning that day. So it gives them a purpose, right? Why am I here? What am I learning?
When a kid walks in and they're not sure what they're learning or why they're learning and how is it relevant to them, and a lot of times they're not able to focus or streamline their attempts to be able to learn. And so when you're very clear on what your goal is for the day, what those learning intentions are, you've set out a strategic plan, kids don't come in and just look at the agenda any longer. They will look at the agenda, but also then look at the learning intentions. I watch them do this consistently to try to see, okay, these are the things that we're doing today, but this is the overall goal of where we're trying to get and why we're doing these activities.
You know, they know what the learning intentions are, they know what they're supposed to learn. By the time the end of our lesson, if they feel like, okay, I did learn that, I understood that. It gives them time to self-assess, whether they learn that or they didn't learn that, or like, I didn't really get the learning intentions, how to connect with the lesson. Provides me with that feedback of the teacher. I was like, okay, then maybe we need to revisit this and not, move forward right away. Or if, the class feels like they got the learning intentions, I understood that this, connected dots, this, and this, then I realized that they learned the activity.
I think any new teacher, we just need to get into the habit of remembering to focus on our standards and to analyze those standards in a way, what should students be able to know and do to achieve this standard. And I think that's the best place to start. That's the most accessible place to start. And if all else fails, conversation with another colleague can really help us to get to that place where we are comfortable sharing until we are confident enough to do them on our own.
I think learning intentions and success criteria are the heart of teacher clarity. I think without them, we don't get that opportunity to share with students what the path we're asking them to take is. I think they impact student learning in a variety of ways. The ability to self-assess, the ability to articulate what they're learning, how they're learning it, whether they learned it or not. To what degree did they learn it? I mean, all of those things, you need some sort of reference point, and I think that success criteria and learning intentions are those things.
So let's dive in. Kateri and I are going to split the difference on this one. I'm going to introduce learning intentions, and she's going to talk about success criteria. Those are our two practices for this webinar. Now, hold on to your hats because learning intentions have an effect size of 0.51. So they in and of themselves have an above average impact. The video will not be available for tomorrow. The video is still being produced. You got a first sneak peek preview of that video. It has not been produced and released yet. You did get a secret peek view of that video. So what are learning intentions? Learning intentions describe what it is that we want our students to learn. In the chat box, if you would type in learn, not do. Learn, not do. And my dog Ollie is really fired up over learning intentions. You can hear him in the background. And so I want to show you a couple of quick examples, and let's sort out what makes a learning intention a good learning intention. So there on the left, you have a standard that was copied and pasted out of a standard of learning in the United States. And I want to show you two potential learning intentions, and your job will be to decide or vote which one you believe is the most effective learning intention. Which one is the most effective learning intention? Option 1 or option 2? Yeah, absolutely. Because a learning intention cannot be the restatement of a standard. It needs to be in first person pronouns, talking to the students and with the students, not talking at them, and it should have the what and the why. Excellent. So you're exactly right. Option 1 not only has meaning, but there you go. It has it right there for you. Let's look at another example. The standard is there on the left. Option 1, option 2. Absolutely. Option 2 is our better option for a couple of reasons. Number 1, TwizBat drives me crazy because we're talking to students in third person. No one likes to be talked to in third person. Try it. Walk into a room and start talking to somebody in third person and watch what happens. People disengage. They don't really, it's a total turnoff. So why do we talk to students in third person? The student will be able to. No. The second thing is that option 1 has a strategy in it. There are other ways to study and explore cells. The microscope isn't the learning there. The learning, if you look at the far left, is describe and use a model and talk about the functions. The microscope is a strategy, not the learning. Not the learning. And with learning intentions, you don't want an I can in your learning intention. I can statements are for success criteria. Learning intentions are not I can, they're the big statements. So today I am learning about the parts of a cell. I am learning how to effectively communicate my ideas about a topic. I can statements are for success criteria. We haven't gotten there yet. Kateri's going to take us through that. Here's the last example, just for giggles. Here's one more example. And Kateri, I'm throwing in this example before I hand it to you as success criteria, because someone asked about differentiation. Someone asked about inclusion. So I want to make sure that we hammer that home. If you notice there on the left, there's the standard. Option 1, option 2. And why is option 2 a better deal? For the very thing we've been talking about with equity. What happens if a learner isn't ready to read James and the Giant Peach yet? What happens if they're interested in reading something else? Can they still compare and contrast 2 or more characters? The answer is yes. Option 1 excludes those. Option 2 is all about equity and transferability, because we want them to do this when they're no longer in our classroom. And I want to be able, as the teacher, to level the text, let them choose their text, but still meet that learning intention. Learning intentions are all about what it is they're going to learn. And they're often phrased, today we or I am learning about, and there you go. That's the common phraseology for learning intentions. Now we're getting ready to move into what many of you have pointed out as I can statements. And that's going to take us into the success criteria conversation. You heard them talk about this in the video. Now let's shift to success criteria. Kateri, success criteria prop up this entire process, right?
They are huge. And just to go back real fast, the other thing I love, John, about that example, besides allowing for differentiation with students, it allows teachers to pick something different but be on the same page, right? So when I'm meeting with my team and we decide we're going to work on this learning intention, we might all choose different things as our tasks, because maybe I have a favorite and you have a different favorite, right? But we're focused on learning when it comes to learning intentions. Success criteria is what really brings the learning intention to the space where the learner can use it to self-reflect and self-monitor. You heard Marisol say, it's a reference point, right? Everybody needs a reference point. Sometimes you need to reorient yourself. Sometimes you need to be able to check in and say, wait, what do I need to do next? Where am I? What's my next step, right? And the success criteria can help guide that. The success criteria has that big effect size, right? Double the growth, which is that promise for tonight. So using learning intentions combined with success criteria, you've got some real potential for great impact. And so let's look at some implementation. All right, so teacher clarity. First, what's a success criteria do to help us as teachers to be clear? They provide a pathway for learners to meet the learning intention. And like so many people said, we as the teachers have to build our expertise, right? So we need to identify what is that pathway to meet the learning intention, and how are we going to be able to say that out loud, right? Actually name the pathway. It includes, success criteria includes multiple steps leading to successful learning, not just one single criterion, right? So you're being open enough that students can have choice and have voice in their work. They don't have to go just one way to get there. And so being aware as the teacher of what are those multiple steps, but I can still master this. I can still show that I'm successfully learning the learning intention. Success criteria also allows teachers to monitor learning progress towards the learning intentions. So that's where that assessment piece comes, right? The informative evaluation. How are we constantly checking in with our learners to find out where is their progress? Where are they in relationship to that mastery, and how can we make those adjustments? This work, these learning intentions and success criteria, they're not stagnant. They don't stay the same. You use what you find out in instruction in that day, and you may need to make adjustments for what your learning intentions and success criteria will be the next day. But to figure out what those adjustments are, you have to monitor students' progress using the success criteria to get towards the learning intentions. The success criteria also help learners answer the question, how will I know that I've learned it? And so many people were saying, this is a great question to just ask. Where are your learners right now? And being able to answer that question. And just that is a form of feedback, of a form of assessment. All right, so let's flip it. The other side, because we want to engage in teacher clarity using success criteria, not just for us so that we're clear, but for the learners, right? It's how the learners are receiving it and using it that is most important for their learning. So success criteria helps learners retrieve their background and prior knowledge to know, oh, this is how I'll know I'm successful. Oh, this is how it connects with what I've been learning so far, right? These are the things I already know. It also helps to identify the necessary tools to engage in the learning. So in your success criteria, perhaps there's a specific language frame or different types of vocabulary or strategies or literal math, science tools, right? Social studies tools that you want them to be using. And the success criteria can help identify what those are and keep them at the forefront of students' learning so they can look back and say, oh, I can use that tool. I learned that tool. Success criteria helps monitor progress. Myself as a learner, I can look at that success criteria and do some self-reflecting and figure out, where am I? How am I headed? And is what I'm doing, what I'm trying, working or not working? I can help, success criteria can help me seek feedback, right? So I can say, hey, I've been trying to work towards this success criteria. Do you see it in my work? Here's how I'm thinking. I'm going to explain this. And the feedback will help to really target the exact success criteria of what we're trying to learn. Success criteria can also help students recognize when they've met the learning intentions. And that's huge for building efficacy, right? We really want to build learners' agency that they can learn new, hard things, right? And so being able to celebrate that moment, I got there. Yes, I can do these things. I'm there. I did it. That is a big moment for learners, and being really transparent with that is very powerful. All right, so success criteria. Very, very intricately related to learning intentions and to our question, why, that relevance, right? In fact, when I'm working on learning intentions, relevance, and success criteria, I often have an iterative process where I keep going back to the standard, and then I have to think through the learning intention. Okay, what are the concept skills? What's that big idea I want learners to learn, right? And then when I get to that success criteria, how will I know I've learned it? I have to think about, well, what would I say? What would I do if I've mastered this learning? Not because I've done all the tasks for today, and not because I've completed the agenda, right? What would it actually look like and sound like to be a master of this content, of these skills? All right, so take a moment, because we've talked a lot. We've seen some examples. We heard some great teachers, and we looked at learning intentions. And we kind of have that idea of what success criteria could be. So what's happening here? How would you edit this learning intention and these success criteria? Remember, it's that iterative process, right? So it's not just one or the other. You may have to adjust both. Think about how you would make those changes and then pop them into the chat. Absolutely, Amy. This one is, I'm learning to introduce a topic and state my opinion, and I'll know I'm successful when I can include all the items on the writing checklist. That is a task, right? I'm really focused on just checking things off. I'm just focused on making this product. And instead, I want to focus on the learning. So how would you change that success criteria to really focus on the learning? What would you expect to hear or see from students if they have mastered this idea around topics and opinions? That learning intention may have to change also. All right, pop it into the chat. How would you make some changes? Nice, Amy. I'm learning to introduce a topic so that I can share my opinion with others. Yep. That would be a great way to reframe the what. Now let's think about the how. How will I know that I've learned it? What can I do that would show mastery? Yeah, I can tell others how I think or feel about a subject, right? Absolutely. I can explain my reasoning, right? My opinion and my evidence that I have, right? My experiences. When I can present my opinion clearly to an audience of my peers in writing or speaking, really nice, right? That leaves that space open that we're not saying that it has to be written. It might be in speaking, and there are lots and lots of ways to really value students' different modes of expression and different modes of engaging and different modes of representing. And absolutely, Olivia and Doug are going to talk so much about that next time. Right? How do success criteria and learning intentions, how does teacher clarity really value that equity, that space of equity? Yeah, I can provide an opinion with appropriate evidence or reasoning. Yeah, and so that appropriate word can get a little bit hard, right? So what would be appropriate? So I can provide an opinion with my evidence and reasoning that someone else can understand, right? Someone else can ask questions about, someone else can respond to. That's fantastic. You guys are awesome. Here's some other ideas of ways that you might revise this one. So today I'm learning ways to communicate my opinions so that I can share my thinking with others. I'll know when I have it, when I can describe what an opinion is and is not, when I can support my opinion with evidence, when I can write my opinion in a sentence. Yeah, and I really like that we could change that last one, right? So that I could write it in a sentence, or I could speak it in a sentence or in multiple sentences. That's fantastic. All right, here's one more to see if you can try to revise. So take a look at this. This one's from high school geometry. I'm learning about the relationships between angles formed by two lines intersected by a transversal. It's speaking my love language right now. All right, how will I know that I have learned it? When I can reason quantitatively. That's hard for me to use as a reference point. As a mathematician, I think I have a sense of what that is, but my expertise is kind of blinding me from the fact that perhaps the learner isn't sure what quantitative reasoning is or critical thinking is. How might you adjust that success criteria? Absolutely. Amy, we got to make this measurable, right? Somehow I have to be able to use the success criteria as the teacher to progress monitor, to check in, to adjust my instruction. And as the learner, I have to be able to use success criteria to also monitor my learning, right? Also check in as a reference point and adjust how I'm working. So how can we make that measurable? Measurable will help to make it actionable. When I can demonstrate that two lines are parallel and explain why they are or are not. Nice. Yeah, so demonstrating and explaining. Fantastic. When I can find them in the world, right? So when I can find examples of them in the world and explain them. So I'm noticing that there's, yeah, exactly. It would help to see the standards language. And so that's 100% a place to go, right? To check back in with that standard so we have the alignment all the way through, from standards to learning intentions to relevance to success criteria. And I see a lot of people thinking about the verbs. They're really noticing, well, what's that verb? And the verbs will adjust depending on what the standard is and what the learning intentions are. Really thinking about the learning, not the task. The verbs become so, so important. All right, so next, what does this really look like, right? We're going to dive into some different ways to show and know success criteria, because we've seen a lot of I can statements, which are really a powerful way to share success criteria, but there's so many other ways, right? So our first work is to get in that habit of mind, like several people said, as teachers, to be clear for ourselves, to know the what, why, and how of our teaching. And now we have to figure out how we're going to communicate that to our learners and how are we going to engage them in that work. That is really the purpose of all of it, right? From the learner side, being able to use that success criteria. All right, so we've seen a lot with I can statements. So many of you are probably familiar with them, using them. So I just wanted to share two kind of twists on I can statements. So there was a question earlier that is just amazing. What do you do when you have learning intentions and success criteria for learners who aren't reading yet? Or perhaps they're not reading English yet, or not fluently, right? What can you do? Well, there's lots of ways to communicate success criteria and learning intentions. And it can just be talking and engaging in conversation. It can also be sharing visuals that align with. So we're going to look more deeply at this next time with exemplars with Olivia and Doug. But this is an example just kind of to highlight that even with our youngest learners, this is from my pre-K classroom, when we're working on learning ways to represent the values of numbers, I can show an exemplar, I can show an image of what that success criteria is. And it might not match exactly what they're doing, right? Might not match their numbers exactly. They might not have exactly the materials. And then below it, I still have the I can statements for myself, right? Or for my paraprofessional, or for any adult who comes in the room, or for my kids that are getting ready to read. They might be able to pull some of those words like I can. And that helps guide my questions that I'm going to ask. That helps guide the learners so that when they're working independently, they can look at that picture and say, am I on the right track? Am I really engaged in this work the way that will help me to represent values of numbers? So think about how images can complement your I can statements. Another kind of twist, now this school division uses the language a little differently. At the top, there's a big idea, that's the learning intention. Mathematicians make numbers easier to work with when they can. And then below it, the learning targets are actually what work on the success criteria, those I can statements. And so you see how they're listed, two success criteria, and then there's space for evidence. And that is the learner's job, to find evidence to prove that they actually can meet the success criteria. And this was homework. So this is a middle school student who's working on their homework. And instead of having it be that exit ticket, which is totally fine, this could be a different way to change homework to engage in some reflection as well, right? So just thinking about how can you engage learners in collecting the evidence? You don't have to be the sole collector. And in fact, engaging learners in collecting evidence around the I can statements can give you even further information to know, are they really understanding the success criteria, and are they really understanding what we're trying to learn here? And that can help guide your feedback as well. I can statements. All right, this is one of my favorite twists on an I can statement is a we can statement, right? So we can statements are very similar to I can statements, but the twist is that you're emphasizing something that as a collective whole, we're going to rely on individual strengths and be able to learn something we couldn't have done as individuals. So I often think of this we can space as building on something that we've worked on as individuals and showing how as a community of learners, we can do something now and help each other in a new way. So here's two examples. This is an example from a second grade language arts class. So on the first day, their learning intention was, I'm learning to actively listen to my fellow writers' hook strategies and to try their ideas. The success criteria is I can explain how I chose to hook my readers, and I can listen to and try a new way to hook readers that fits my piece of writing. So right in that space, really focused on me, my writing. I'm going to share it, but I'm going to really just focus on my writing and what I'm going to do with my piece of writing. And on the next day, the focus is going to be as a class of writers. And that's where that we can comes in. So the learning intention is now we are. We are learning to collaborate in order to revise our hooks. And the success criteria is we can explain how we created hooks for our readers. We can give and receive feedback about our hooks, and we can act on feedback to select and revise an effective hook. So that white text is really where that shift is happening from individual learning to collaborative learning. So, and I absolutely could see the space where perhaps the collaborative learning is the bit that comes first, right? As a group, we start to inquire, explore, or understand something, and then I transfer it to being able to do it as an individual. Either would work. Here's one more quick example. This one is from an Algebra 1 class, high school maths class. So again, you can see that shift happens in that social learning intention. When you're focused around that social piece, and instead of just communicating back and forth to a peer, we're focused on day 2 on that collaborative piece where we can collaborate as learners. Wow. All right, so we've got I can, we've got we can. I'm going to give you a moment just to process that. John, thanks for pointing out different types of learning intentions definitely exist and are really cool to dive into. All right. The next way to show and know success criteria, rubrics. So some people said this earlier, right? And you could hear some of the teachers saying, well, I want the rubric with my students sitting right next to them as they work. So that's going to be one thing I want to point out before we dive in and see some examples. Thinking about how the learning intentions and success criteria can be posted, but really the interaction with them is what is most important. That's the same with a rubric. Too often I shared a rubric with learners all the way at the end of the assignment, right? After we'd finished the learning, I'd say, oh, here's the rubric for our final product. Here you go. And it would be when I was ready to assign a grade, they'd already done all the work. Whew, man, right? So absolutely, John. So rubrics, when we're using them to communicate success criteria, then we want to share them all along the way, right? We want learners to be engaged in using them to guide their work, but that means we don't want it to be product focused. We still want it to be learning focused, right? All right, so here are 2 examples of single point rubrics, which blew my mind the first time I saw them. That means you just say, yeah, I got it, or no, I don't, right? Or, hey, I've got some space to grow in this area, or, yeah, I'm glowing, I'm doing great. That is amazing. So on the left, you can see that's from a kindergarten math class. And on the right, there's an older grade example where you can see the criteria is really clear, right? what we're working on. That's that success criteria. And on the younger grade, there's images to support it. And then the learner can take a look and say, okay, yes, do I have this or not yet? Single point rubrics are a great way to build over time, right? Sometimes people ask, well, you know, there's a, how do I build over time and connect to things that we've done before while still focusing on just today? That the single point rubric can really support that work and show a growing thread as we learn more and more. That bottom left picture is, yes, John, ironic, everywhere ironic. The bottom left one, do you see how it says, I use math words, pictures, numbers, tables, and or graphs to help me explain the problem? Over time, learners built to a place where they knew all those tools, and now they're making decisions about how to communicate, right? So earlier in the year, that might not have been there, or it might have just said, I can use tables or I can use a graph to help me explain. And now incorporating all of them is giving them that choice. They're becoming those decision makers. And the success criteria is helping to make that transparent and create that equity so that all of the learners are expected to be decision makers. All right. These are holistic rubrics. This is another way that you could organize your success criteria. So on the left and on the right are two examples. You can organize them differently, but really the purpose of them is to look at the qualities of what we're doing in order to be successful, how we know that we're learning, and we're saying, okay, if you've mastered it, you'll have all of these qualities. If you're headed towards mastery, you'll have these qualities. And if you're just started out, you'll have these qualities. And that helps to give learners a really clear vision for what to work on next, right? I know I'm here and I'm going to move up to the next place with my work. A really powerful way to give that feedback. All right, and here's the third type of rubric, an analytic rubric. So take a look, because I used to think, oh man, analytic rubrics, those are only for older kids, right? There's so much to read. But check it out. You don't have to have that much, right? You could just, you see the example on the left, have like a stoplight, red, yellow, green. You can just say, oh, you know what? Please teach me. I'm not sure. Or I can do this with some help from a friend. Or I'm good to go. Got it. And then do you see that space for evidence to prove it? So again, helping learners become part of that process is really important. Having that rubric along the ride with learners. All right, so I'm going to pause because we've looked at 3 different ways to engage in success criteria. I can, we can, and then rubrics. And we looked at 3 kinds of rubrics: single point, holistic, and analytic. So what are you noticing now? What new thing are you noticing about success criteria? How is this helping to illuminate something new for you with success criteria and understand the role of success criteria with teacher clarity? Pop something that you're realizing right now, or something that's circling in your mind right now, into the chat. Yeah, thanks for getting us started, Annette. Absolutely. This engages learners in self-reflection. It's different from that teacher rubric. Absolutely. So this is actually a beautiful space that sometimes, like I know I had rubrics that I was using, and I had to go back to them and think, if I was going to have this be a student-facing rubric that they could use for themselves, how would I need to change this? How could I make this a tool? Like Joelle says, yep, a tool for the students, not the teacher. Natalie, I love it. Multiple ways to show success criteria depending on the intent. Yeah. Thinking about those I can, moving to that social, collective, collaborative bit of we can, and then the rubrics that really help to emphasize that self-reflection engagement, and also the complexity of learning, right? That there's multiple things that you might be connecting over time, and giving students the freedom to differentiate their pace, to say, I need to take a little longer here, or I got this, I'm ready to move past this, right? So really holding everyone to those high expectations, but allowing for some differentiation with pace, with focus. Yep, a focus on learning and not just compliance. Absolutely. Knowing where that target is. Golly, John, look at all this. You guys are noticing so much. And it's not just tasks, process. Process is the focus. Sue, I love it. Why can't a teacher use the same process to assess their own teaching? Absolutely, right? So we have to know, what's our success criteria? What would we call success criteria? Good one for us. How would we define it? And I think for teacher clarity, the success would be, can learners say what they're learning, why, and how they'll know they've learned it? And then can they use that to actually propel their learning forward? And can we use it to propel their learning forward? I love it.
And Kateri, there's some really good comments in there about things that are coming up.
Ooh,
So for those of you that are like, well, what about this? What about this? Hang tight. Kateri's just getting started.
I love it. Yeah, because Annette, nice. Co-created. Absolutely. That's huge. All right, hold on to your hats, people. Here we go. All right, so modeling. This is a space where sometimes I see rubrics, I can statements, and I think, wow, that's a lot of language. And John said earlier that he likes to think about moving from simple to complex, right, and concrete to abstract. And modeling can help make that happen. It also really creates that interactive piece. So let's look at some modeling. I have for you 2 examples, because I think sometimes seeing the modeling in early childhood, which is what we're going to look at first, is really powerful. So you can see how amazing success criteria is in guiding young learners' learning and ownership of their learning, but how easy it is to communicate that even with young learners. And then we'll look at a middle school example, because I think sometimes we forget to model when they get older, right? We model kind of automatically with young learners, but we don't always connect it to success criteria. And then middle school, we may forget to engage in that modeling. So let's see both. So first, we're going to watch the kindergartners. You're welcome, Wendy. It's my true love. All right. John and I are so very, very thrilled to have worked on the Visible Learning for Early Childhood book. So this is a kindergarten class, and you're going to get to see one of my very favorite kindergarten teachers, Alicia, teaching and communicating the success criteria and the learning intentions by modeling. So she's really making this work concrete. Feel free, as you're watching, to add things to our chat. What are things that are jumping out to you? What are things that are noticing, connections, questions? Put it in, make that live feed.
During my literacy time throughout my day, I find it very beneficial to use a think aloud strategy for the students, where I'm modeling what I'm actually thinking in my head when I'm doing something. And so I've started to transfer that into my math mini lesson. And so when I'm thinking about solving a problem, I model for the students exactly what was going through my mind when I was thinking about numbers, or I'm manipulating the numbers, so that I'm really making that visible to them, so that they have a clear picture in their mind of what's going on with that problem. How many people do I have in my family? 5, right? There's me. 5. There's Mr. Demchek. There's Meredith. Here's Gabe. And here's Eli. You got it. And where's hey, when did we use this before? Right there.
For counting. For counting. 100 things. And for when we had the 100th day, we had some trail mix.
And we counted 100 things on 100th day when we made trail mix. So it's kind of like what I was doing at my house, right? So how many pretzels was I going to give everybody?
5.
All right, watch me do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Wait, I have a question. Did you figure it out?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, because I'm a mathematician, I always ask questions. I was thinking to myself, well, how many pretzels did I give everybody?
5.
I gave everyone 5. How many pretzels did I use all together?
5. 25. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Wow. 11. 10.
Wow. There's a lot of different numbers here.
10, 20, 11.
Here's how I counted. Watch how I'm going to count it. I'm going to count it like this. There are other ways you can count it, and I hear some of you doing other ways. I'm going to show you how, when I was at my house, how I counted it. I went like this: 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. My students know what their learning goal is because we try to incorporate that into our mini lesson each day. So I try to state that in very simple, clear language, make sure that they understand what it is that we're doing, make sure they understand what the work is, what the goal is, and then how they will know that they achieve that goal. I try to model that through my examples during my mini lesson. And then once everybody is released to work, those that have signaled that they're still unclear or those that I've noticed are unclear, I pull them over and we do another round of clarification before they go and work. So that's your work. Your work is to figure out how much I did for Trailmix in my house and then move on to your table. But your goal for today is to think about groups to help you count efficiently. So today we're going to think about how are we using groups to help us count efficiently. You will know that you've done this. You will be successful on this when in your journal you have showed your groups and you can describe how you used your groups to help you count. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, do we notice how I use groups to help me count?
Yes.
That's what I'm looking for your work today. My students are aware of the success criteria. They know when they've been successful. I try to give them several examples of that. So one would be whatever I'm modeling during the mini lesson. I try to make sure I have an example so they're able to see that. I also, if it's a lesson that's going to go over multiple days, I try to use the sharing from the other students to show them what the success looks like and where we're going next. Give me a thumbs up if you understand your goal for today and the work you're going to be doing. If not, we can chat quickly. Anand, are you okay?
All right, so there she is. And you guys had amazing comments, right? You could hear her say the difference between the work that they're doing, right, their task, and what they are learning, their goal for thinking about groups, and then how you'll know when you're successful. She also, in her modeling, really emphasized that decision point, right? That this is just one way to count. There's going to be lots of other ways that you know how to count, that you can do it. When she showed her work for recording, there's lots of different ways to record. She didn't say it has to look just like this, but it does have to show groups, right? So being able to have success criteria that's open enough that learners are making decisions and being able to think about their thinking and really learn those big ideas, that helps to really grow learners, right? And helps to build their agency. Fantastic. Yep. Thank you. The no masks on. Listen, Amy, I was talking with someone the other day who asked me, do I miss teaching 4-year-olds in person right now? Because last year I taught 3, 4, and 5-year-olds virtually. And I said, well, I don't miss getting sneezed on directly in the face every day, but I'm sure the masks would protect me from that right now. All right, so next, let's watch a modeling example, this time with middle school, and this is a writing example. So these are going to be 8th graders engaging in modeling how to give effective feedback as peers.
I'm listening to Seth read this to me. I want to hear it from his voice. I'm going to be reading, though, what I see in the text. But I want to hear him read it to me because I want to hear his voice when I'm listening. And I'm listening for evidence and reasoning. So guess what? You would be heads together on the same computer. It's just easier for him to read. And I'm going to do something in my Google Doc right here that is insert comment. So there's going to be a little visual. Am I going to comment on every little thing that he says? No. I'm going to pick a couple things maybe as I'm listening to him write. And I might write a question, or I might write, this is some evidence that I found, or I might go up here and highlight. Now let's remember that Ms. Oko has to go to highlight and not do the text like I always do, right? And I might highlight a really cool sentence that I want to talk about as he's reading to me. That's going to give us something to talk about at the end of this. Make sense? Okay. So you ready? So you have to read really loud.
Okay.
Go.
Dear future president, sports should be free to play all around the world because there keeps people active and healthy. Sports are very important. Some people play sports for the money and fame, but I think the true meaning is to have fun. Children join clubs and make friends. You can also enjoy sports because you know that you are getting exercise and it feels amazing to have muscles, doesn't it? Exercise is key to a healthy lifestyle, and I think more should realize that. In conclusion, sports are very important because it keeps people active and healthy. They should also be free to play all over the world.
So I want to kind of go through, going back to our sentence stems, thinking about what was my role? Tell me again, what am I listening for?
The evidence and his evidence
and reasoning, right? There was a lot of things I could talk about in there. I could talk about how great his transitions were. I could talk about all of his details, but I'm listening. Do you agree that he has a lot of evidence? Yeah. Right? A lot of reasoning, a lot of thinking through why sports are good. Yeah. So he effectively uses his reasoning. He effectively uses his evidence. One thing that's ineffective to me, what do you think? What's one thing that you're reading that out loud that when we've been talking today, what do you think you're missing?
What am I asking the president to do?
Yes. What do you want him to do? You have this great, long, fabulous why sports are important, and the future president is going to go, okay, so what do you want the president to do? What do you want to see happen?
To make more parks with.
So you want more parks. Do you want more money for schools to have sports?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that say that anywhere in your letter?
No.
Okay. So you've done an amazing job of everything except number 2. What action, right? So do you now have a purpose for writing? Right? So what are you going to do? Fix it.
I love her question at the end, right? Do you now have a purpose for writing? And that's the space where success criteria can be really powerful to help identify what's my purpose? Where am I headed towards next? And that modeling, right? It was great because in the modeling, he found his own space where what he needed to add. He identified it himself, but she also modeled how she was going to put comments in, how one would read, and then how to use the success criteria to give the feedback. Remember her saying, there's so many things I could comment on in his writing. All these things are great and amazing, but I'm supposed to be giving feedback on, did he have an effective reasoning? Did he have an effective argument? And that is very, very powerful to help guide her and the learners. She didn't say, you have to say exactly this as your feedback. There's still that space for the learners to identify, well, where was the effective argument, right? Where were the effective reasoning in that? Where maybe was there a hole? So lots of decisions for the learners to still engage, but the success criteria helps them know what feedback to give and what next step to take. All right, modeling. So I'm certain that so many people see and do modeling, right? And the next step is to connect that to the success criteria. John, I would say, this was actually an 8th grade example. I would say though, in high school, my modeling would sound very similar to this, right?
Yeah, sometimes 8th grade is in high school. Sometimes it's in middle school. This is a secondary example that shows how this would look and the type of language you would expect from learners, their ability to articulate those success criteria more fluently than, say, a 1st grader that's probably going to operate in a different and have a different conversation with you. Yep, absolutely.
All right. Modeling. All right. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into next week on Monday with Olivia and Doug, because they're going to dive into some other ways of showing and knowing success criteria, because there are 7. And we don't want to put you in your cognitive overload, right? So we want you to have some space to think and process about learning intentions and success criteria and the role of clarity, and then examine some more ways to communicate success criteria next week. But we want to give you just a little highlight reel, okay? So here are exemplars. You may have already thought about this, right? What would it look like if I used an example or a non-example to exemplify the success criteria? So here is the work that a 4th grade class was doing. Their learning intention is on the left to describe the relationships among fractions and decimals using models, language, and notation. And you can see they've already started making notes on it, right? They're already chatting. They're already talking together and trying to understand that academic language and make sure before they start their work that they really understand what they're trying to learn today. And then on the right is the success criteria as I can statements. I can model fractions and decimals in 3 or more ways. I can compare the values of fractions and decimals using models and a common whole, which in their conversation, they realize they need another word for that, right? To make that accessible. That means the same whole. All right. And then the third one, I can describe how my models are connected. So in this work with an exemplar, this exemplar, sometimes you maybe have an exemplar that you are sharing that's already been created. Perhaps it's a non-example that you're analyzing, or perhaps it's a student-made one that is being shared as the example. Often we talk about sharing student work and engaging in conversation, building that capacity for peer feedback. And this exemplars is a great space for that work. So we're gonna watch just a quick clip just to give you a sense of what it might sound like when learners are using an exemplar to evaluate their work, looking for the characteristics of that work, not just looking for, not looking just for specific tasks, right? Or things to check off on a to-do list, but really trying to look for the characteristics, the qualities of the success criteria.
Let's look at Marlo and Carla's poster, and we're gonna go one by one and see what things, what success criteria are they showing? Like, how are they showing that they've met this success criteria in their poster? And is there anything that they could maybe add to better meet the success criteria? Okay. So let's first talk about this one. Did they model fractions and decimals in 3 or more ways? Who can like say specific examples of how they did this?
Well, for one of them, they have the circle model, or yeah, I don't know really the circle, and they put it into a half and 2/5, and they colored it in, and you can see that a half is greater than 2/5 because it fills up more. And then they also,
so that's their first model.
and then they put it on a number line, and then they also put it on the grid paper.
Okay, what about this one? Compare the values of fractions and decimals using models and a common whole. Who can talk about how did Marlo and Carla do this?
When they were doing their number line, they were showing it right here. So they used this part to show it for the 2/5, then they used the top part to show for the half.
So they're using the same whole right here to compare those two fractions. What about decimals? Because this doesn't just say comparing fractions, it also says decimals. So how are they showing us the comparison of the decimals?
With the calculator. So they basically just divided their numbers, and they got their number from the calculator, and then they just see which one's bigger and which one's smaller. Also, on their piece of paper at the very top, that's probably the first thing they did, it says right under 1/2, 0.5. Well, we already knew that because we've been studying that. And also under 2/5, it says 0.4.
So their conversation continues. And this is time that Isabel has protected at the end of her lesson. And this lesson is going to continue into the next day. So I think often we make the mistake of introducing learning intentions and success criteria and then forgetting about it, right? But coming back for that sharing piece, using it throughout our instruction, and then using it to guide what are we sharing and how are we talking about that sharing? How are we using each other's conversation to help do some self-evaluation and learn how to use that success criteria is really powerful. The next day, after having practiced giving some feedback in that together as a group, they did a gallery walk and gave each other glows and grows based off of the success criteria. Now, if you're with me, before I had success criteria, my glows and grows were things like, hey, I really like that you use the color green. It's my favorite. Success criteria really helped make those glows and grows actually about what we were learning. All right, so more on exemplars and the power of exemplars next time with Olivia and Doug. And the last thing that will be new next time, or not last new thing, but the last way of showing and knowing success criteria new for next time will be co-constructing success criteria. So someone asked this earlier, how do you have learners engage with a rubric so that it's success criteria? It's not just something that the teacher made. Making the rubric with them is one. So this is a rubric that I made with my second grade class by analyzing work together and then identifying, well, what do you think it would look like if we had a strategy that was just starting to build strategies and then expert strategies? What would a just starting explanation look like? And then an expert explanation? What would just starting out to understand look like? And what would expert understanding look like? So building that work with students, being co-constructors is really powerful. We do this so much when learners are young. We often call them anchor charts that we make with learners. And when those anchor charts are around the success criteria, like this one, we can sort by creating and using their ideas to help figure out, well, what are the ways that we can sort? And let's use that to help us identify our success criteria as sorters can be really powerful. Throughout all of our work with success criteria, we have 3 guiding questions, sort of our success criteria for our success criteria. Regardless of what language you're using or how you're engaging learners in knowing and showing success criteria, we want to check to see, did the success criteria truly represent the learning intentions for the learners, which of course lines back up to the standards? Did I pick the best option for implementing success criteria based on the type of learning expected? So there's so many different ways, and you wouldn't want to get stuck in just one, because I can statements won't work all the time, and rubrics won't work all the time. Sometimes you have to model. Sometimes you need an exemplar. Sometimes you need that single point rubric, right? And then, am I using success criteria to support my students taking ownership of their learning? And that's really the ultimate question, right? If the success criteria is being used by learners to own their learning, then we know that we're doing something right. We know we're having that positive impact. So let's watch that. This is a first-year teacher. Had your minds blown by that thought. And she is introducing, she's introducing the learning intentions and the success criteria. And in this work, she is empowering her learners to own the learning.
When I say teach neighbor what we're going to be learning in literacy today. Teach.
We are learning about comparing and contrasting.
Oh, class.
Oh, yes.
Okay, we're learning that so that we can see how things are
alike and different.
Yes, alike and different. So to be successful, thinking back to our success kit, remember as you're at your stations, if you feel you have grown or you realize you're sliding back a little bit, we need to make sure we move that. These are the things you're looking for. I can tell what comparing and contrasting means. So let's talk about it for just a minute before you head into your station. I need to know that you know that. Gage, what does compare mean?
Like when they're the same, like they have wings or feet.
So if we're talking about comparing two animals, maybe if they both have feet or they both have wings, how they're the same. You may go flip up. So if that's compare, Payton, what is contrast?
How they're different.
Very good. I know both of you are past a level 1 at this point. You may go flip up. So now that you know what it means, moving down, I can compare characters, events, and settings and stories. That means you're telling me how the characters or the events or the settings are, everybody? Alike. Okay, the next one, moving on down, gets a little harder. You're going to have to start contrasting those characters and the setting and the events. So you're telling me how those character settings and events are?
Different.
And then last, I'm going to give you this big thing with circles on it. It's called a Venn diagram. What's it called?
A Venn diagram.
And you're going to compare and contrast using that graphic organizer called a Venn diagram. It is going to be a station day. Could you please?
I just love that. I wish that had been me my first year, and it definitely was not.
Me too. She's fabulous. I mean, she is a fabulous teacher from Kentucky. I mean, she is just amazing.
And she engages them, right? So whether or not they can read what's on the whiteboard doesn't matter, because she is engaging them and making sense of what they're learning and how they'll know if they're successful with whole body, right? So they can remember all that vocabulary, they can remember those tools, and they can go and dive into that work and use the success criteria to monitor their progress. So powerful. All right. I hope that showed. It can be short, right? It can be something very small step forward. You don't have to be perfect at this, right? Just choose one thing that can help improve, one thing that can help move your work forward in being clear to yourself and to your learners about what you're learning, why, and how you'll know you've gotten there, how you know you'll be successful. All right, so checking in tonight, hopefully, or today, or this morning, you feel like you can move forward in your answers to these questions. Can I explain the role of learning intentions and success criteria in ensuring clarity? Can I compare and contrast the different ways of creating and sharing success criteria with my students? Still more to come next week. And then the big question, can I describe the relationship between different types of learning and different ways of sharing success? It's a big question, but here's the big question. Can I utilize the components of clarity to ensure equity of access and opportunity to rigorous learning experiences for all my students? And that is where we will head next week. So hopefully you have a start, a vision for what that might sound like, and Olivia and Doug will take it even deeper and further. Thanks so much, everyone.